If you've ever looked back at a relationship and wondered when her respect started slipping, you're not alone. For most men, it never happens in one dramatic moment. There's no argument, no clear turning point, no obvious mistake you can point to. Instead, respect fades quietly, one small concession at a time, until the dynamic feels completely different from how it began. The uncomfortable truth is this: women don't suddenly lose respect for men without a reason. Respect erodes when boundaries were never clearly set in the early stages. Not because a man was weak, but because he was trying to be agreeable, generous, and understanding, often at the cost of his own structure. Over time, that lack of structure creates confusion. You start giving more while feeling valued less. You invest more energy while receiving less effort. And instead of attraction growing, it slowly turns into tolerance. This isn't about being harsh, dominant, or emotionally closed off, and it's not about playing games or manipulating outcomes. It's about understanding how relationship dynamics are formed before emotions fully attach. Most dating advice teaches men how to react when things go wrong. Very little teaches them how to position themselves so things don't go wrong in the first place. Respect doesn't come from chasing approval or proving worth. It comes from structure. Boundaries create that structure. They quietly communicate self-respect, direction, and emotional stability. And the men who understand this early don't spend relationships guessing where they stand. They know, because they helped set the frame from the beginning. One of the earliest and most damaging mistakes men make in dating is opening financial access too soon. This doesn't always mean handing over money. More often, it starts with information. Talking about income, savings, business plans, expensive purchases, or future financial goals feels harmless. Men think they're being open, relaxed, even authentic. But early on, financial transparency is not intimacy, it's leverage. And once it's given away, the dynamic quietly shifts. From a psychological standpoint, early financial exposure turns attraction into evaluation. Instead of discovering who you are, she begins measuring what you offer: stability, resources, access. Without realizing it, you step into what can be called a provider audition. She hasn't committed, she hasn't invested emotionally, but you're already proving usefulness. And the moment that happens, emotional curiosity starts to fade. Mystery is replaced by calculation. This is where many men get confused. They were taught that providing equals value, that being generous shows leadership. But provision without commitment doesn't build attraction, it replaces it. You stop being the man she feels drawn to and start becoming the man she assesses for practicality. Once a woman begins evaluating your financial capacity, the connection becomes transactional, even if no money ever changes hands. The danger increases when men start solving problems early, covering expenses, offering help, stepping in during financial stress before there's real commitment. What feels like support actually creates a role downgrade. You don't become her partner, you become her safety net. Responsibility without authority, appreciation without desire. Women often test this boundary subtly. A comment about stress, a bill, an unexpected expense. She's not asking outright. She's observing. How fast do you move? Do you feel compelled to rescue? Do your boundaries collapse under pressure? Most men rush in, confusing generosity with leadership. What they're really signaling is predictability, and predictable men are easy to place in utility roles. The correct boundary here isn't cold or defensive. It's calm, grounded, and firm. No explanations, no guilt, no overgiving. A woman with genuine interest will respect this immediately. A woman who was only comfortable when access was unlimited may pull back. That's not rejection. That's filtration. Leadership begins where access is controlled. Most men believe disrespect is obvious. Raised voices, insults, open hostility. Because of that, they miss it when it actually matters. Real disrespect in dating is rarely loud. It's subtle, casual, and easy to excuse, especially if you don't want to create tension or seem overly sensitive. And that's exactly why it works. Subtle disrespect shows up in small moments. She interrupts you and keeps talking. She makes a passive joke at your expense and quickly follows it with, "I'm just teasing." She compares you to an ex in a way that lowers your position. She takes hours to reply, but expects instant responses from you. None of these feel serious enough to confront on their own, but together they form a pattern. From a psychological perspective, this isn't cruelty, it's evaluation. She's asking one silent question: can I get away with this? Women test boundaries the way pressure tests weak points, gradually, one small push at a time. When there's no response, the pressure increases. Men often mistake silence for composure. They believe staying quiet makes them look calm, mature, or unbothered. In reality, silence communicates permission. When you let subtle disrespect slide, you aren't being patient. You're signaling that your self-respect is flexible. The damage compounds quickly. When a woman lowers your status in public and you allow it, other people notice. Friends pick up on it. Their perception of you shifts first, and hers follows. Because once it's clear you won't defend your boundaries in front of others, it becomes easier to cross them in private. Effort drops, tone changes, attraction erodes, not dramatically, but permanently. High-value men don't respond to disrespect with anger, sarcasm, or public embarrassment. They don't escalate. They respond immediately and calmly. One clear sentence, no emotion, no justification, no argument. That response does something powerful. It resets the frame. It communicates that there is a line and it exists. This isn't about controlling her behavior. It's about enforcing your standards. Respect is not preserved by endurance. It's not earned through patience. And it's never protected by silence. Respect is enforced through clarity. This is where many men lose leverage without realizing it. They believe availability shows interest. That saying yes quickly proves enthusiasm. That rearranging their schedule demonstrates commitment. In reality, constant availability communicates something very different. It signals a lack of structure. Women don't evaluate men in isolation. They evaluate the life that surrounds him. When a man drops everything the moment she reaches out, it doesn't feel romantic. It feels unanchored. You might think you're prioritizing her, but from her perspective, you're showing that nothing else in your life holds weight, and a life with no structure doesn't feel safe to step into. The pattern is subtle but common. You meet someone you're excited about. The connection feels promising. To avoid losing momentum, you start canceling plans, skipping routines, moving commitments. Just this once. Dinner with friends disappears. Workouts get missed. Your schedule becomes reactive instead of intentional, not because you're careless, but because you're afraid of losing the opportunity. That fear is what she feels. From a psychological standpoint, attraction grows when a woman senses that a man's life has direction before she enters it. When your time is always available, it loses value. And when your time loses value, so do you. This isn't about playing hard to get or creating artificial scarcity. It's about protecting the foundation of your life. There's a crucial distinction most men miss. Being busy isn't attractive. Purpose is. A man with purpose doesn't need to manufacture scarcity. His schedule already reflects priorities. When you protect your time, something shifts. She stops seeing you as an option she can summon and starts seeing you as a man she has to meet halfway. Saying no doesn't kill momentum. It sharpens it. It creates anticipation. It signals self-control. And self-control is one of the strongest indicators of maturity. When you acknowledge her interest without abandoning your plans, you communicate stability. You don't win attraction by being constantly present. You win it by being consistently grounded. This boundary traps more men than almost any other because it feels like connection. She opens up early, talks about past relationships, emotional wounds, family problems, and how deeply she's been hurt before. She tells you she feels understood, that talking to you feels different, that she's never opened up like this so quickly. And it's easy to believe this means intimacy is forming. But emotional dumping is not emotional intimacy. It's early emotional access without investment. What's actually happening is a test of how much emotional labor you're willing to provide before she commits to anything real. Most men step into this role without hesitation. They listen for hours. They reassure. They stay up late calming her emotions. They give advice and stability. And slowly, the dynamic shifts. Instead of becoming the man she desires, you become the man she stabilizes herself with. The emotional support system, the safe container. And while safety is important in long-term relationships, It does not create attraction in the early stages. Masculine polarity fades the moment you take on the role of therapist instead of partner. Men often confuse trust with bonding. They think, she trusts me, so she must be growing closer. But trust without mutual investment doesn't create desire. It creates utility. She leans on you emotionally, then gives her excitement, curiosity, and unpredictability to someone else. Not because you failed, but because you overextended too early. Emotional intimacy is a form of currency. When it's given freely without commitment, it loses value. Healthy emotional pacing looks different. You listen, you acknowledge, you stay present, but you don't rush into fixing, rescuing, or carrying her emotional weight. You don't let emotional crises dictate your availability or identity. You can care without collapsing into her emotional world. You can be supportive without becoming responsible. This creates space for reciprocity. A woman bonds most deeply with the man she invests in emotionally, not the one who carries her emotions for free. Pacing emotional intimacy doesn't block connection. It preserves it, because intimacy that isn't earned builds dependence, not desire. And dependence is the opposite of attraction. This is the moment where most men undo everything they did right before. Things were consistent. The connection felt mutual. Then, without warning, her energy shifts. Replies slow down. Warmth fades. Effort drops. And instead of staying grounded, you panic. That panic is natural, but it's also destructive. The moment you feel distance, your instinct is to close it. You send more messages. You reply faster. You check in more often. Silence makes you uncomfortable, so you fill it. Without realizing it, you communicate one thing very clearly. You need her attention to feel stable. When that doesn't work, many men move to reassurance. They let her know they're available for anything. They soften their position. They try to emotionally secure the connection. If distance continues, overcompensation follows. More plans, more compliments, more effort. You turn the volume up, hoping effort will restore what space removed. From a power dynamic perspective, this is where attraction collapses. The moment you increase effort in response to withdrawal, the balance shifts. She holds the frame. You chase it. And once that imbalance sets in, desire suffocates. A woman cannot miss a man who is constantly trying to close the gap. Absence is what creates longing, not persistence. Pulling back isn't always a test. Sometimes it's clarity forming. Sometimes interest is fading. Sometimes it's simply life. But panic turns every situation into the same outcome: loss of leverage, loss of self-respect, loss of attraction. Attraction never returns because you try harder. It returns when there is space. When you stop rewarding distance with increased attention, one of two things happens, and both work in your favor. If she's genuinely interested, she recalibrates. Her effort rises to meet yours. If she doesn't return, then the truth was already there. You didn't lose her by holding your ground. You stopped chasing something that required you to abandon yourself. Space doesn't manipulate outcomes, it clarifies them.